Depending on who you are and where you come from, your perception of the brand Oakley could vary. If you're from America, and more specifically the lower parts of the country, then chances are you associate the brand with individuals like this. If you're Australian, then you might see this brand's sunglasses on your local street pharmacist. For my whole UK-based childhood, Oakley was nothing more than a forgettable eyewear brand I would only see in Luton Airport duty-free. I was far more concerned with playing the Luigi gambling simulator on my DS or beelining to the fragrance section where I would proceed to spray myself with every single test bottle I could get my grubby little mitts on. Little did I know, this unsuspecting and seemingly vanilla brand had previously been pioneers in the eyewear industry, and yeah, I highly doubt 8-year-old me would have cared about the eyewear industry, but what I did care about was films. Oakley sunglasses are known for appearing on screen across cinema, but one example I can specifically remember watching as a child was Mission Impossible 2. As a kid, one of my favourite hobbies was climbing dangerously high up trees and scaring the shit out of my mum. So, watching the opening of this film where Ethan Hunt free climbs a cliff face for fun left me in awe. Once he summits, he gets a delivery via rocket containing none other than a pair of Oakley sunglasses, and more specifically, the Romeo model. I can remember thinking these were the coolest sunglasses I'd ever seen. I didn't even realise these actually existed outside of Mission Impossible, especially as in the film they had screens within the lenses and speakers built in to give Ethan his mission brief. Unfortunately, these glasses also self-destructed, which is ironic because in a way that's sort of what happened to the brand, or at least its reputation for being cutting edge, cool and creating models such as the Romeo. However, we'll get into that later in the video. First, we need to go back nearly half a century to Southern California, way before celebrities were wearing Oakley products. Jim Janard founded Oakley in 1975 from his garage with an initial investment of just $300. The brand actually started out making handlebar grips for motorbikes, as Janard was a motocross enthusiast and was very involved with the scene in Southern California at the time. Supercross champion Mike Bell, who was friends with Jim, said that these handlebar grips were innovative and unconventional when compared to competitor products. Towards the end of the 70s, Oakley would release goggles, but unfortunately these would function very poorly with issues with fogging due to the lens being too close to the wearer's eyes. When Jim presented these to the BMX industry, riders opted to wear them on top of their helmets. This became a bit of a trend, and despite the shortcomings of the goggles, people liked the look of them. Sometime in the early 80s, Jim was driving to San Diego. As he drove parallel to the ocean, the light from the setting sun beamed onto the side of his face, so even though he was wearing sunglasses, he was bothered by the amount of glare he'd get coming in from the side. At that moment, he thought, how come there aren't any sunglasses that have the same coverage as goggles? In response to this, he created the eye shades, which were released in 1984 and resembled racing goggles. They gained worldwide recognition after Greg LeMond won the 1985 Tour de France while wearing these sunglasses. These were followed up by the Oakley Frogskins in 1985, which had a more casual design and were made to compete with the very popular Ray-Ban Wayfarers. This was their first venture into the lifestyle eyewear market. A turning point for the company and the start of the infamous mad scientist era was when Jim Janard decided to purchase a 3D printer for the company in 1992. Unlike 3D printer TikTokers, he didn't just make glorified landfill shit. This machine allowed Oakley to move away from the angular and sharp line design language of the 80s and incorporate more rounded and sculptural shapes, moving towards a more sci-fi reminiscent style. In 1994, the Oakley eye jackets were released, being the first ever sunglasses to be designed with CAD technology. Michael Jordan was brought on as the face of the eye jacket campaign, and as a result, Oakley went mainstream. The products from this time became extremely sought after. In 1997, they started the X-Metal series of eyewear with the Oakley Romeos. All sunglasses from this line were made of 90% titanium and defined the brand's mad scientist era for their innovative and futuristic designs. The rest of the X-Metal series included the Mars, Juliets, X-Metal XXs, Pennies, Romeo 2s, Half Xs, and the X Squared. By the late 90s, Oakley's started to pop up all across popular media. As mentioned earlier, Tom Cruise wore the Romeos in Mission Impossible 2, Wesley Snipes wore a pair of 4s as the Vampire Hunter Blade, and Brad Pitt sported the Mars in the 1999 cult classic Fight Club. Dennis Rodman would also be known for wearing multiple models from Oakley both in the film Double Team and in his day-to-day life. As someone who is known for looking like a randomized video game character, the more out there designs such as the 00 point freeze paired well with his eccentric style. With Oakley's reputation at an all-time high, Jim Janard would only push harder for bizarre and more progressive designs. At the 2000 Sydney Olympics, the Oakley over-the-top glasses were unveiled on the head of Trinidad and Tobago runner Atto Boldon during the 100-meter sprint. These became one of Oakley's most iconic products due to their wacky appearance. As the name suggests, the frame arms went over the top of the wearer's head instead of around the sides. The only product by Oakley that managed to top these in terms of weirdness was the 2002 Medusa. This helmet and goggles two-piece was the most avant-garde release from the brand and unsurprisingly shocked consumers. For a brand focused on functionality, I don't really see what the purpose leather dreadlocks would have unless you wanted to cosplay as a Rastafarian Mad Max character. In 1998, Oakley would make their move into the watch industry with the release of the Time Bomb. This was extremely disruptive to the market at the time, as watch designs had always been very conservative and simple. As stated by Brian Takumi, an Oakley VP, the reaction to the watch was, "What the f*** is this thing?" which I guess is extremely on brand for the company. The packaging was a stainless steel vault, and when the first watches were shipped, the boxes included the statement, "Time Bomb" inside, and yeah, the US Postal Service was not very happy about this. Jim Janard was a quirky guy, but not that quirky. Oakley had taken what they had learned with the X-Metal series of sunglasses and applied it to timepieces, and in my opinion, this allowed them to further push and experiment with the brand's mad scientist design language in a way that wasn't possible with just eyewear. They went on to release a multitude of different watches with equally as wacky and innovative designs. With all these wild releases that somehow managed to advocate both form and function, it's hard to think that Oakley could ever fall off. Enter Luxottica, a multinational conglomerate known for controlling over 80% of all major eyewear brands. Their ownership and control span across brands, manufacturing, distribution, and retailers. Simply put, they had a monopoly over the eyewear industry, and in the early 2000s, they were not happy about independent brand Oakley being, well, independent. In 2001, Luxottica demanded Oakley to massively lower its wholesale prices, to which Oakley said no. In response, Luxottica decided to stop carrying all Oakley products throughout their retail stores worldwide. For context, they owned pretty much all the largest eyewear retailers, including Sunglasses Hut, LensCrafters, and more. This tanked Oakley's stock price and put the company in an extremely precarious position, which led to Luxottica's hostile takeover of the company in 2007, which cost them a pretty $2.1 billion. It's easy to call Jim Janard a sellout for this, but when you're up against such a large and ruthless conglomerate that already has a monopoly over the eyewear industry, then it was only a matter of time before they managed to drive the company into the ground if he carried on refusing to sell. It is insane to think Jim Janard started the brand with just $300 in a garage and turned it into a $2.1 billion company. Right after he departed from Oakley, Jim Janard went on to start up a new camera company called Red. Yes, that Red. After the company's sale, Oakley completely lost its creative touch, opting to go as vanilla as possible to appeal to a much wider audience, which ultimately led to the brand losing its edge. Gone were the days of over-the-head goggles and blast-proof watches. They carried on making sports-focused eyewear products, and I'm sure many people within those communities will swear that the brand was still cool at this time, but ultimately that stemmed from their functionality rather than their perception from a fashion perspective. At this time, if you weren't buying Oakley products for sports purposes, then you were either an insufferable frat boy or a suburban dad who'd window shop them out of his local shopping mall to keep the sun out of his eyes while he flipped burgers on his new propane gas grill. Oakley had officially become cringe, and it stayed that way for a long time. With the mad scientist days being a thing of the past and the Luxottica takeover resulting in more conservative designs being favoured, we also saw groups known for wearing Oakley products become more conservative too. In fact, it went past that and into the realms of ultimate cringe. Fascism. Yeah, I bleep that because I'm a pathetic little man at the mercy of YouTube, so I'm not going to dwell on this subject for too long. Essentially, in the mid to latter half of the 2010s, Oakley sunglasses would gain a reputation for being the eyewear of choice for a certain group of people in the US who could be described with a term that starts with neo and ends with a word that rhymes with artsy. If you need help understanding what I'm getting at, then just do your own research. Unfortunately, I can't spoon feed you all the information with a side of shitposty memes. Obviously, this is a low point for Oakley, and in some ways they didn't exactly help themselves with this association, but to avoid yapping about politics, let's move on to how the brand eventually redeemed itself and beat the cringe allegations. Around 2018, we started to see a slew of clearly Oakley-inspired frames appear on high-fashion runways. Louis Vuitton's Spring-Summer 18 show in Paris displayed sports sunglasses in an otherwise non-sports inspired show. During the same fashion week, Stella McCartney showed off her turbo-wrap frames, which also had some very obvious inspirations. This continued in 2019 with Heron Preston displaying some derivative eyewear in their spring-summer show. With attention starting to pick up towards sports eyewear, we saw Oakley collaborate with a number of major brands around this time, including Vetements, Alexander Wang, Palace, Kith, and Nicole Wall. It was clear that the world of high fashion and a few trendier brands were giving Oakley sunglasses their seal of approval, but that doesn't immediately translate to the fashion consumer market. I actually don't think that these high fashion appearances and collaborations did much in the sense of making Oakley cool again. Rather, it just got people thinking about the brand and in the context of fashion rather than just for sports functionality. It was a combination of styles and trends that were popular or on the rise in the fashion zeitgeist at the time. For starters, the dad style or dadcore was definitely on trend. Straight-leg jeans paired with New Balances or Asics went from being the uniform of unfashionable suburban dads to extremely trendy. It's interesting because this was the style or stereotype that contributed to Oakley becoming uncool, and then years later this was ultra trendy. This at the very least created an environment for fashion consumers to be more open to products that they had previously condemned to just something their boomer family members would wear. However, as we moved into the 2020s, we would see the rise in both Y2K fashion and Gorpcore, which proved to be the perfect storm for the revival of Oakley. The Y2K trend would quite obviously lead to Oakley becoming popular as the brand was at its peak during the turn of the century, so all of their vintage products would perfectly encapsulate the trend. Gorpcore also adopted the brand as its performance frames fit perfectly into the outdoors focused aesthetic. In general, the pieces that included Y2K designs gained popularity while the more outdoor-focused pieces were bought up by Gorp enthusiasts. Vintage Oakley occupied a cross-section between two of the most popular trends of the early 2020s. As a result, it was adopted by the streetwear community and remains popular today, especially in the niche of archival sportswear, which has been on the rise over the past couple of years. With Oakley remaining under the ownership of Luxottica, you'd probably think they'd be too large and out of touch with current online-driven trends to respond to the uptick in interest for old Oakley gear. Well, luckily, the soulless corporate overlords at the conglomerate at least had the smallest bit of self-awareness to realise this. So they brought on Kyle NG, creative director and co-founder of Braindead, to spearhead a new division of Oakley aimed at bringing back old designs in a modern context. In 2022, they started with the re-release of the Oakley Fleshes, which were initially introduced back in the early 2000s. They were very popular and led to an array of different colorways being made available. A year later, we saw the re-release of the Oakley Chop Saw silhouette, which was then later reworked into a mule version and a high-top boot. I personally really like all these shoes, but I can definitely see why a lot of people aren't the biggest fans of this collection, with a lot of these models looking more like something a kid would wear to explore low-tide rock pools. Regardless, it's great to see the re-release and reimagining of these wacky footwear offerings. There isn't a single competitor brand offering something quite like this, so Oakley Factory Team has carved itself a really unique niche and contributed to the revival of the brand as a whole. Whether you hate Oakley or are a die-hard fan with every model of the X Metal series in your collection, you can't deny that the brand has managed to make an incredible comeback with both its vintage offerings and new releases. So to summarise, Oakley was based, then it was cringe, and now it's based again. That's the end of the video, goodbye.